Hello, interwebs. It's Rich Trzupek, chemist, author, air quality expert, and supporter of sound science. I'm here to talk to you about Sterigenics again. You may have heard Sterigenics facility in Willowbrook was shut down and is currently not sterilizing medical devices. That's not quite true. What happened was that John Kim, director of the Illinois EPA, used his powers under Section 34 of the Environmental Protection Act to prohibit Sterigenics from using ethylene oxide. A little different, but I'm a nitpicker. And he did so on the basis of declaring that Sterigenics was essentially its operation constituted an emergency under the Illinois Environmental Protection Act. That's an interesting interpretation of emergency, but I'm sure the courts will figure that out. Now, what precipitated this was some ambient air monitoring that was done that Willowbrook commissioned. And that ambient air monitoring, let me find the phrase here, was, quote, showed extreme daily fluctuations. And because of the extreme daily fluctuations, they decided that there was, Illinois EPA decided an emergency existed, and ethylene oxide tank gets locked up. Can't be opened until Illinois EPA or a judge tells them otherwise. So let's take a look at the data first, and then we'll talk a little bit about extreme daily fluctuations, because it's an interesting topic. Let's proceed. This is the homepage of EPA's Air Quality System, AQS. It's the system that the EPA uses to keep track of all the monitoring data that it collects. And understand that EPA has very specific procedures and protocols for monitoring that they need to follow, and the people who are experts in this field need to follow. My particular expertise in terms of measurement is about point sources, smokestacks. But I know enough about ambient air monitoring to be dangerous. And let's first look at some of the EPA data and then compare it to Willowbrook. Our first stop is going to be the air data page. Here we can download data, get all kinds of reports, visualize data, do all sorts of stuff. Since we're interested in hazardous air pollutants, I'm going to create a report that shows monitoring data for hazardous air pollutants in the state of Illinois. And let's see what that looks like. Here we have the beginning of our data review. Clever souls will notice that the first 49 rows are missing. That's because those were monitors that showed zeros, and I didn't see any point in wasting your time with those. And you also see that some columns are hidden, and those are because those columns have no bearing on this discussion. But you can recreate this report or any report you want if you go to the air quality page. Anyway, you can see there's a few things to see. If we look in the observation numbers, you see how observation numbers are 60 and 120, 61, 61, 120, 107. So this is data from 2017, and I just picked it randomly. So you see we get lots of observations. We get the mean, which is, you can think of it as the average. And then there's something called the 95th percentile. That's the data point at which 95% of the data fits under. Comparing that 95th percentile, that highest but for the next 5%, to the mean gives us an idea of how much variability there is. And I've ranked these in terms of variability. So you can see for tetrachloroethylene in Hammond, Indiana, the variability of those 60 observations was 19,001%. For cadmium, even though we had 120 observations, the variability was over 1,600%. And we go down and down. And we'll scroll down and look at some more data. We're still well over 100% as we go down the line, and we'll take a look at the next few rows. And you'll see we don't get to variabilities below 100% until we get to row 157 and acetaldehyde readings in Schiller Park. The point here being that variability, even when you have a much larger sample size than what they had in Willowbrook, is the norm. That's the way ambient air sampling works, because we have this thing called weather that is constantly changing, and we have this thing called multiple sources of all these pollutants that are constantly adding a little more or a little less. Now let's take a look at the Willowbrook data in a statistical manner. And it's hard to do statistics when you have a sample set of 11. Let's say that first of all. And we don't have enough there to establish a real geometric mean or a 95th percentile. So what we'll do is we'll use the average, and then we'll add to that what's called the first standard deviation, which kind of gives us this approximately the same kind of analysis as we did with the 95th percentile and the mean. And the variability here is 114%. That's about what you'd expect. Actually, it's lower than what you would expect, especially given the small sample size. So this extreme variability, if that's the excuse for Illinois EPA prohibiting the use of ethylene oxide at this power plant, I think, in the words of Ricky Ricardo, John Kim's got some explaining to do. Another part of this is something I've constantly said and written, that if you know how to do it, you can do the kind of hit job that the Tribune is doing on Sterigenics, has done in a number of companies near my old neighborhood of Hegewisch in the southeast side of Chicago, if you know how to do it and how to present it and what not to present. So let's do that. Let's look at particulate, specifically fine particulate, or as it's known in the biz, PM2.5. This is a list of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for different pollutants, and you see there's 3 of them that apply. It's PM2.5. So how about we find some PM2.5 sources? But who should we look at? Who should we look at? Well, we're deciding we have to know where to look, and the best place to start is the National Emissions Inventory. It's something the EPA does every 3 years. The latest report that has been validated is the 2014 report. 2017 should be coming soon, but it's not yet validated. So we'll poke around in the 2014 National Inventory Report for PM2.5 sources in Chicago. It's a pretty easy to use system. It talks about all kinds of sources, not just stationary or point sources, mobile sources, fires, which are a really big source of pollution. You know, most people don't realize that. And biogenic sources, including the cow farts that AOC would like to get rid of. Yeah, I think probably the cows out in the field would enjoy that too if they got rid of them. But anyway, I digress. We have a variety of tools that we can use to decide where we want to look at sources and what kind of sources we want to look at and pollutants we want to look at. It's fairly ergonomic and intuitive. So you go there and poke around and find out all kind of things. I'm really impressed with the way EPA has made the system as accessible as it is. But what source of deadly PM2.5 emissions should we look at? Wait, I've got an idea. Doesn't the Chicago Tribune operate a printing plant? Let's see. By golly, they do. And just to give you a comparison, I put up Sterigenics reported ethylene oxide emissions for that year. But look at the Trib's PM2.5 emissions, 20.21 tons in 2014. Oh my God. Or as the Trib would put it, when they're looking at crap on somebody, it's over 40,000 pounds from that plant. I wouldn't walk close to it. And what's the problem with PM2.5? Well, here are some of the things that EPA talks about in terms of particulate: premature death in people with heart or lung disease, non-fatal heart attacks, irregular heartbeat, asthma, decreased lung function, increased respiratory systems, all related to the over 40,000 pounds of PM2.5 that the Trib emits in a year. And then here's a nice tidbit out of EPA Region 1 that you can read at your leisure, but notice that it says in the beginning of paragraph 2, the size of particulate is directly linked to their potential for causing health problems. Fine particulate, PM2.5, poses the greatest health risk. And more from the EPA. Quote, some particles less than 10 micrometers in diameter can get deep into your lungs, and some may even get into your bloodstream. Of these particles less than 2.5 micrometers in diameter, also known as fine particles or PM2.5, pose the greatest health risk. Oh my God. But that's not all, my friends. That's not all. That's not the only danger that the Tribune Company knowingly, wantingly foists upon the public. They were lithographic printer. I've been around printers all my life, but you don't take my word for it. EPA has a document. You can look it up there. That's called the Control Techniques Guidelines. They do these for a lot of industries, and this one's for lithographic printing and letterpress printing. And in it, they talk about this thing called fountain solution that lithographic printers use. Used to be fountain solutions had a lot of isopropyl alcohol in them, but they don't do that anymore. Instead, most all lithographic printers use fountain solutions that contain a chemical called ethylene glycol. Do you know how you make ethylene glycol? You start with ethylene oxide. Ethylene glycol is ethylene oxide's little brother. Ethylene glycol is listed as a hazardous air pollutant. Now, the TRIB doesn't have to report it, and of course they don't report it, but we know they emit it as part of their total VOC emissions. Let's take a closer look at what ethylene glycol does. And when I say they don't report it, I should say I assume they don't report it because it was not in the NEI database. It's possible that NEI failed to put it in the database even though the TRIB reported it, but I doubt that they reported it. Anyway, here's the OSHA page for ethylene glycol. So let's take a look at the OSHA limits for people who work with this stuff. Now, understand that OSHA limits are a different beast from safe ambient air concentrations because OSHA limits are set based on the idea that workers are healthy and have greater tolerance. And what's considered safe in the ambient air for hazardous air pollutants is some fraction of the OSHA limit. 1% is often used. So we see here that the American Council of Government Industrial Hygienists, TLV, time-weighted average, is 25 ppm. So that means the safe value for you, if you were walking next to the Tribune printing plant, most people would say it'd be about 0.25 ppm or 250 parts per billion. And I think I'm skilled enough that on the right day with the right wind direction, the right meteorological conditions, I bet you I could get a sampler out there and find more than 250 parts per billion of ethylene glycol. And unlike ethylene oxide, there's not too many sources of ethylene glycol around, driving around. Now, if your radiator leaks, because ethylene glycol is antifreeze, that could be a source, but I think you'd notice if that was happening. So the sources around the TRIB would most likely be the TRIB. Sorry. Now, I'm not really afraid of the TRIB or think they're a polluter, big polluter, or putting anybody in danger. I was doing the scientific equivalent of sleight of hand using data. I used some data. I spun some data in a particular direction. I didn't give you context. And I led you to a conclusion that I honestly don't believe myself. I call it Hawthorning. That's my name for doing that. And you can do it to anybody. Given the right pollutant, and there's hundreds to choose from, given the right monitor, given the right company, you can do it to just about anybody. And I believe that the Tribune and Michael Hawthorne will continue to do this to people until somebody wakes up, either at the paper or in the public, because you guys are getting played. Just telling you. Take her easy, interwebs. See you next time.